what I've tried to do in the last two sessions was to, thank you so much, Mary, was to establish certain things about Papa. This is part 3. And the title, of course, is Awolowo and Biafra, Awo and Biafra. And in order to get into what really happened, I thought it was very, very important that we started with how Papa was involved in it. His imprisonment, his release, his involvement with the leaders of thought, his involvement with Gowon's government, his meeting with Ojukwu, working with the government of Gowon, then eventually how he supported the federal government, of course with Yoruba people, and we proudly did it against the Biafrans because they essentially invaded the West at Ore. And we always talk about Oleokuija Ore. It was a fierce fight. And so we moved from sitting on the fence to the federal side against Biafra. And then the war itself was prosecuted. And some of the things that we've talked about in the last few days also have to do with the lies about what Ojukwu said, or I released Awo, or I had a meeting with Awo. We had this. Thankfully, we have other sources to understand what Ojukwu's claims, or to know if Ojukwu's claims were right or wrong. And in studying, we discovered that most of what he said were not true. And that's why I said it's very important for us not to just take a person's word for it. So when you read the forgotten documents of the Nigerian Civil War by Ode of Famon, you read all the things many of the things Ojukwu said. For instance, in his Boston interview in 2001, he claimed to have released Awo. He claimed to have set up a phone line between Enugu and Ikene, only for us to discover that in actual fact, what happened was that he went to meet Awo in the dead of the night. And where did we find that? We found that in the book by Wole Soyinka. The book is called You Must Set Forth at Dawn. And so by the time you compare these things and with other materials, you're able to establish the truth. Of course, there's another book called Awolowo on the Nigerian Civil War that detailed the conversations that were held between Papa and Ojukwu. And thankfully, we have a man called Chief MCK Ajuluchukwu, who was also present at that meeting, alongside Njoku and Olorunwa and the rest of them, who were able to tell Olorunfunwa, who were able to relate, or relay the events of that time, of the period. And what we've discovered so far is that for the most part, when you hear certain things from certain places, it's not really about the truth. It's just something that's going to make the quote-unquote Messiah happy. And that doesn't really work with someone like me, because I'm not going to celebrate your lies because it makes you feel good. I would rather go for the truth, and then we can share it respectfully, and hopefully all of us can learn together and we'll grow. And to be clear, what I really want us to get from all of this is to understand history, of course, but beyond that, to also at some point find healing. And the way that will work is it's going to work based on truth. Now, I know that some people don't really care for any healing. And I know that because of a conversation I've had with a lot of people, and also to now discover that what I discussed with that person, I found it in history, on the history of his groups, as far as of his ethnic group, as far as their relationship with Nigeria is concerned. The idea basically is not to heal, is not even to get what they're telling you they want, is to use what they claim to want to get what they really want. And for those of us who decide or refuse to be blackmailed, I hope that this information will also help your resolve to stand on truth and to love everybody, but to be very, very protective of your space and of your mind. Don't let people gaslight you or blackmail you with lies. We talked about how we talked about Victor Banjo and the things that led to the switch for Yoruba people from wanting him to come to our side, and then to saying he shouldn't bother. And that, of course, was because he was leading the Biafran army. And from history now, we know that our elders were wise. And they were wise not to allow Victor Banjo to come in, because even without seeing the letter that Ojukwu had written to Victor Banjo, they knew. And Papa said that in his speech of August 1967 at Ibadan, which we read yesterday. We read it from the book called Chief Obafemi Awolowo, The Political Moses. Is by Adedara Oduguwa. That's where you find the speech that Awolowo gave in 1967. And it was in that speech that he made the statement that if the East is allowed by any acts of omission or commission to break away or opt out of Nigeria, the West and Lagos would also, if the East was allowed by any acts of omission or commission to secede from Nigeria, the West and Lagos would also break out or opt out of the Federation. That statement is a statement that Ojukwu and the rest of his crew have used to essentially taunt and almost terrorize people, especially Yoruba people. It's what you see in the book by Chino Achebe. The book is called There Was a Country. It is what you will see in the book by Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala. The book is called Chino Achebe, Teacher of Light. It's a regurgitation of lies and propaganda based on the twisting of the words of a man. And it's important for us in our generation to make it very clear that, number one, Yoruba people do not owe anybody in Nigeria anything. And even if anybody owed you anything, I'm not the one that will pay it. But to be very clear, you are owed nothing, and you're not going to make us feel less than we are based on your lies and fabrication. That's number one. Number two, Awo did not owe anybody anything. Right? If you owed anybody anything to be a bank, I think he paid. He didn't owe any ethnic group in Nigeria nothing. There was no promise for anything. And the reason I'm very, very particular about these things is not because I hate any group. It's because I love my own. And I know that the way to destroy a people, especially people like Yoruba, is, number one, to denigrate the people that they look up to, tamper with their history, do things to corrode their self-respect. And this is not a new thing. It's been on for a while. And I think I quoted it the other day. If you read the book by Papa Awo, the autobiography of Chief Obafemi Awolowo, it was published in 1960. When you read that book, you discover that even as far back as 1940, Papa had seen something from the actions of Azikiwe, and he said it looked to him that he wasn't a conscientious member of the NYM, and he was bent on corroding the self-respect of Yoruba man. And if you thought that was a lie, you must have heard, I don't know if you were here when I was reading the letter from the Igbo National Caucus of the Igbo State Union that was essentially revealing a plan they had since 1944. And in that plan, they said a lot of things about different groups in Nigeria and what they wanted to happen to those different groups. And there's nothing cool about the things they said about Yoruba or about Hausa. It was about them. Now, like I always say, it's not that every single thing these people did, they were sent to do it by their people. So, for instance, people who say things like, it's not like our people did it now. But you see, it's difficult for me to take that as anything sensible, and I'll tell you why. Because you are the ones, regular people are the ones who repeat the same lies that these quote-unquote leaders are put out there. And regular people are also the ones who take advantage and benefit from the produce or from the profit that they get, or from the gains of these lies. It's the regular people who regurgitate the same propaganda from this elite. It's also the regular people who are able to take advantage of the gains of their lies. Therefore, it's difficult for people to actually separate the regular people from the elites because they are almost one and the same. And I said almost because I know that there are still some people who don't join the bandwagon to share propaganda or spread it. But it's important to acknowledge the fact that, for the most part, what a few people used to do back in the day is what majority of people do, especially in a place like social media. Social media has allowed everybody to share their thoughts. It's a free space. But you also get to see the heart of man, as it has to do with their political inclinations and their cultural awareness. These are the things that we see now, and that's why it's important for us to revisit these things. And then lastly, before I start reading, what Papa did is something that every Yoruba man and woman, boy or girl, elders and young ones should be proud of. Do not even for 1 second think of apologizing for it. It was good. It was right. If it was wrong, I will say it. I mean, I know you must be able to tell that I revere and adore Papa, but even then, if it was wrong, I would say so, but it wasn't wrong on this matter. And so let nobody gaslight you or make you feel sorry and say, oh, it's my fault now because my leaders, my forebears did it. My forebears were right as far as this matter is concerned. Having said that, involved And then we went on to read his interview that he granted in 1983 during the campaign. This interview was granted in Abeokuta, and he mentioned certain things, and those things become the basis of the conversation we're having. But thankfully, there are other sources that will also help us in understanding some of these things. So we're not going to start with his speech today. We're going to read this much later. But I want to read something from Achebe. And the reason I want to start with this is that I always say it's important for you to read books, even if you don't like the authors, as far as history is concerned. And the reason is that even if you don't believe what they are saying, at least you would know what they are saying, right? And then it's also help you to understand the source of the information or the source of the things you hear in the streets, whether the streets of Lagos or the streets of Twitter or TikTok. What you're hearing is coming from somewhere. And the person, that actually came up with all of those things is primarily Chinua Achebe. Well, not primarily. It was one of those people who came up with it. In Radio Biafra, there was Okon them, there was Uche Chukwumereje, there was people like this, Chinua Achebe, who were essentially just parroting certain statements, not necessarily because those things are true, but because they have a particular agenda in mind. And it's so sad that even after the war, they never really stopped. But before we get to Chinua Achebe, let me just repeat some of the things we discussed yesterday. So we talked about the whole thing about currency and how the currency was changed, and the fact that when you read Papa's interview, he mentioned that one of the things that Ojukwu said was responsible or were responsible for his defeat was the change in currency. Please power tap on TikTok. All right, we're going to have a great time, but we want to make sure that we are, we have no issues with, we have some people, we have detractors. So let's make sure that we don't give them the chance to get it out, right? Good to see you just becoming welcome. Yeah, so Ojukwu mentioned that two of the things that actually affected him two of the things was the food issue and also the currency. And like I said, starvation and food will be the last thing we talk about on this topic before we then move on to how the federal government rebuilt the Southeast. And the reason I'm doing this is because if you're from the Southeast, I will say this again, if not today, tomorrow, just listen. If you're from the Southeast, the reason I'm going to do that session on how the federal government rebuilt the Southeast is primarily because of you and also because of Yoruba people and Nigerians generally. And the reason is this: you've been lied to. The federal government did nothing. We have no federal clinical. Is a lie. There is a lot of things that the federal government did. We're going to get into those things. A lot of money was released to help the Eastern region. We're going to talk about all of those things. And the reason you want to do that is because you want to know that you matter, that you count, and that those who tell you otherwise and say things like nobody cares about you are actually the ones who benefit from your mind being, filled with hate for other people because you were told that you don't matter to those people. Therefore, in order to preempt whatever those people will do, just hate them straight up and be shouting that they hate you. You've been conditioned. So I'm hoping that these sessions will help you heal. But like I always say, in case people decide not to heal, at least for Yoruba people and for Nigerians, if anybody decides not to heal, you'll be protected with the truth. All right, moving on. Let's read a few things just to remind us that there was when the Midwest was invaded, Ojukwu wanted. If you read the book by Niya Borishade, Victor Banjo, Revolutionary Betrayed, he mentioned how Ojukwu instructed Banjo to loot the Central Bank of Nigeria. Absolutely. QPID, you're very correct. We're going to get to that also today. Where was I? Ojukwu instructed Victor Banjo to loot the central bank in Benin, but Victor Banjo refused. However, his boys still succeeded in doing that, and when they were done, they got £2 million out of that, out of the CBN. £2 million at the time is a lot of money, and you find that statement in two books, Nigerian Civil War by John Desenjo, and you also see it in Crisis and Conflict in Nigeria by A.H.M. Green. They acknowledge the fact that about £2 million was stolen by Ojukwu. And of course, that necessitated a change of currency because a lot of money was already stolen. 3 banks were looted: Central Bank of Nigeria in Benin, in Port Harcourt, and in Calabar. Those claims, of course, you find it in Awolowo's interview. You also find it in Nauro's speech in 1968. Apart from the banks, post offices were also looted, and they carted a lot of money away. And so, because the federal government knew what they were going to do with that money, they were going to take Nigeria's money, take it abroad to buy guns to fight Nigeria. So it makes no sense for, again, if you're Yoruba, be proud of Awo. About perfecto, but be proud of him. Let me tell you something. Even on his worst days, if there's anything like his worst days, I want to match up worst days about one come on his best days. So let nobody tell you Awo is the best. And by the way, just like my dad, I don't like using words for him, because I don't use words for my dad either, because they are with us. Apart from the fact that their spirits are with us, the books, the ideology, the thoughts are still here. So please be proud of him.